So difficult coworkers. Start off with, I want to really remind everyone that anyone can struggle with work with someone else. And there may be multiple reasons. Sometimes it's because their choice of behavior really impacts your ability to do your job. Sometimes it's because their behavior is annoying, distracting, rude, or it's just strange. Sometimes it feels disrespectful of you or your position or what you're trying to do at work. It's so common that almost everyone could give you a story of a difficult coworker. And it's a huge part of our jokes, our media, just a constant thing that we all joke about and talk about as a society. This presentation is going to be an overview for skills for handling situations with a coworker that you might find difficult. It will not cover every situation, but I'm hoping it'll provide everybody with useful information that can apply to most situations. So since I did mention that it is part of our media, I thought I'd start out with just a little bit of that. These are all television shows from many eras, and in the case of Are You Being Served from another country, that are all about the difficulty of difficult coworkers and difficult work situations. The reason I bring that up is, again, I just popped these right out without even having to think. I didn't have to look any of them up. These are from different generations. These are shows that you guys watched, or in the case of Dilbert, if you ever read Dilbert, you might even remember a specific situation with an annoying coworker from those stories. This is part of our culture in the US. This is part of culture worldwide, talking about work, complaining about difficult coworkers. Now in TV shows, it's kind of funny. It's very easy to joke about, say, Michael Scott in The Office, but most of us would probably not want to work at the office if we're really honest about it. So this is just really common, and this is someone everyone deals with. So some hard truths I always want to start off with. You cannot control someone else's behavior. All you can do is respond and manage your own behavior. If they do happen to change your behavior, it's because they chose to, not because you forced them. And the reason I say this is a hard truth is a lot of us want to get an answer from a therapist of, how can I make them stop? How can I make them do it? I can give you tools to help, but there is no trick to make someone do something they don't want to do. If someone happens to change their behavior or go along with what you think is best, it's because they chose to. Even if I bully someone or threaten someone, it doesn't mean they're going to do it. Venting about your struggles with a coworker may make it more manageable. It's one of the things we do. We watch these television shows, we talk to each other, we watch films or books, we talk about our coworkers with our other coworkers, we complain to our wife or husband, we talk about these things. Sometimes it really does help. It doesn't always fix the problem, but it can help. And sometimes in counseling, all someone really wants is to kind of vent and really have someone say, you're right. She is difficult. She is rough. She is a witch, whatever it might be. But when you want to actually fix an issue, you got to recognize what you can and can't do. Even though it might make perfect sense to you why your coworker is difficult to work with, someone else cannot see it the same way you do. The coworker themselves might not see why it's annoying or frustrating or why what they're doing isn't helpful. A boss might not see it your way, even if it just makes perfect sense. It's logical to you and most of your friends agree. But no one can see it the way you see it. And I think one of the things that will happen when someone's bothering us is it builds over time. And so we recognize it's been annoying for months, years, and we've been putting up with it, being so patient. But if it's the first time they've heard you complain about it, it's new to them. It might be brand new news that they were that annoying. Just something to keep in mind. If you want to discuss with someone about changing their behavior or something they're doing, there needs to be some reason they're willing to negotiate with you. Some people will not have a reason, no matter what the situation is. Even if the boss talks to them, even if they're going to get in huge trouble, they will not have a reason to want to discuss it with you. But if you have a reason to bring them to the table, then maybe you can get somewhere with trying to change things. So locus of control is a term that we use in therapy to talk about what's in your control, what isn't. I can control what I say and do. I can't control what others say and do. This can be really tricky in the workplace when it's something that you have no say over, especially if it has impact on you. So if I'm really frustrated with another department because I can't do my job because they didn't do their job, That's frustrating, and rightfully so. But I can't necessarily have the influence to change that. I can't necessarily go to that department and get them to do what they should do. Maybe I can if I'm in the right role, or maybe I need to get someone else to, but maybe they won't even do it. And I often have people that will come into counseling going, now what? Sometimes there isn't a solution. Sometimes it really is about how can I cope with it? But be very careful not to make something out of your control your responsibility, because then it feels like you fail when it doesn't change. Then it feels like we didn't do it right. I should have done it differently. Sometimes you really just don't have that level of control over something. Here's some common clashing styles that I see. Type A versus type B. So type A is not actually an official term in psychology, but they tend to be types that are more organized, more stick to the schedule, more likely to file things in a certain order. Type B is more likely to be a little lax about maybe being on time or sticking to a strict schedule, and they're more likely to be pile makers. I know where everything is, but it's not necessarily organized alphabetically. It's very common for these two types to end up working together, and it can be very frustrating. But you're not going to make a type A be a type B. You're not going to make a type B be a type A. This system has worked for them. Why would they change it? But it is just so easy to go, well, if they would just organize things, then I could find them. Well, yeah, I agree. I'm a bit type A. But that doesn't mean that they have a reason to organize it, because for them, they have another system that works. And that's what I mean about you can't change somebody. The group project dynamic. Anyone that did a group project in school or maybe does one at work now, there's some stereotypes that have some basis in reality. The person that shows up last minute and didn't do anything but takes credits. The person that ends up doing all the work of everybody. The person that just agrees with everybody. These are cliche for a reason. They do actually happen, and we talk about them a lot. But they tend to cause clashing. If I work on a group project with somebody and someone takes credit for work I did when they didn't do anything, yeah, makes sense that I'd be frustrated. But someone else might not see it that way. They might go, well, but they did this, this, this. Doesn't mean I'm going to see it their way. Doesn't mean they're going to see it my way. Problem solver versus the investigator. A problem solver is kind of a way to describe someone who wants to get directly to the meat of the project. How are we going to fix this? Tell me what's going on so I can fix it. Just give me the facts. Investigators tend to want to explore it more. Well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? How can we prevent it in the future? Both sides are very good. You need both. But sometimes a problem solver doesn't want to take the time with the investigator to really figure out how to prevent it in the future. They just want to solve the problem and be done with it. Sometimes the investigator wants to spend a lot of time getting information together when the problem solver really says we can just solve it this way. Again, clashing style. Introvert versus extrovert. Someone that tends to not be as outspoken or speak up as much, maybe uncomfortable in groups, maybe uncomfortable speaking up when they have something they want to say. Extrovert tends to be more comfortable in those situations. Both are good. Neither one's wrong, but they can clash. Expert versus rookie. And this is also something just with age. Sometimes if you've been at this job for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and someone brand new says to you, well, why don't you do it this way? It can feel a little disrespectful. Both have their place. Sometimes someone who's brand new can see something in a new way and help us do things better. And the expert has expertise and experience, but it's very easy to clash. Very easy to decide they're just in it to drive you nuts. And the cynic versus everyone else. So someone that wants to be negative. Sometimes the cynic can really help you see something for what it is, or help you change the way things are going, or even recognize that other people are struggling. But sometimes the cynic is someone that we see as bringing everyone down. Sometimes we see them as, well, you're just being negative. We haven't even tried it yet. Again, there's benefits to both types. So with the art of negotiation, and this is by Fisher and Shapiro, I just really like it when you have someone you're struggling with. Keep these things in mind so that you can maybe get somewhere, maybe bring them to the table to change things. So appreciation. If you feel like someone doesn't appreciate you, that your feelings and actions aren't important, then you're probably not going to want to talk to that person. But it goes both ways. If I want to talk to somebody about an annoying habit they have, maybe they don't clean up the office after they use it. Maybe they misorganize my files. Maybe they tap their pen when they're on the phone. It drives me bats. If I'm not going to acknowledge what they feel, what they think, they're not going to want to talk to me. If they're ignoring my feelings by doing those things, I'm going to struggle to talk to them. So part of it is showing appreciation for what they feel and acknowledging what they feel, even if you see them as being a jerk. Because if you just written them off as a jerk, why should they discuss it with you? Affiliation. So in Gottman, which is a person that we use a lot in therapy. So he is one of the big gurus in marriage counseling right now. And I do highly recommend John Gottman's stuff. He talks about bids. A bid would be trying to gain someone's attention or focus on something. So if like during a meeting, I start to speak up and someone speaks over me, I made a bid for everyone's attention and it was ignored. That tends to make us not want to make bids. It makes us not feel as we are part of the group or that we're an equal partner, that we have equal investment. Now, when you're trying to negotiate, say, with someone on a behavior that you're clashing with or that coworker is difficult, if you treat them as an adversary, if them trying to talk to you or you trying to talk to them gets ignored, you see them as an enemy, they're just in it to be difficult with you. You're not going to be able to come to the table together to figure out how can we fix this. If you've ever had someone at work that you never even worked with or talked with that much come up to you and tell you to do something, you're probably less inclined. But if it's someone that you know, someone that's talked to you occasionally, you're more likely to be willing to listen. Autonomy, personal boundaries. And this is one of those things with frustrating co-support. Did someone have a question? I think it was just someone unmuted. Okay. So with autonomy and personal boundaries, whoever that is, could they please mute themselves?
Sorry, I'm trying to mute her, but it's not letting me. I'm really sure. I'll watch it. Sorry, guys.
So with boundaries, most of us should know our own boundaries. But one of the things that happens because boundaries are so personal, when someone infringes on your boundary, sometimes we assume that they know that they infringed on the boundary or that that counted as infringing on our boundaries. It really is important if you want someone to respect your boundaries to verbalize them and make them clear. Just because it makes perfect sense to you and seems obvious doesn't mean it's obvious to someone else. I had a lovely person that came in and just literally walked in my office, didn't knock on the door, and was really surprised that I wasn't okay with that. It's a therapy office. Can I just walk in? Well, no, you need to knock. I could be in with somebody. I could be on the phone. That might seem obvious to me, but it didn't seem obvious to them. Because for them, they were there to see me. Why should they have to knock? I should be expecting them. It wasn't that either of us were trying to be difficult. It was that we both had a view of what was appropriate and didn't consider each other's point of view. We didn't verbalize this is a boundary. And once we verbalized it, there wasn't a problem. But it can be lots of things. Sometimes making certain jokes are crossing someone's boundaries and someone wasn't thinking that through. Now, sometimes it's an HR issue, but a lot of the times it really is a boundary issue of saying, hey, I don't like hearing that. Could we not? That's really not okay in the workplace. Sometimes it's saying, I know that you like to eat at your desk, but the smell is really frustrating to me. Can we work something out? And you always want to be considerate of what their boundary might be, but you're not going to know unless you ask. Status. So when you're treated as an inferior at work, You don't feel like you can talk to somebody or go to somebody. And if you treat someone like an inferior, they're not going to come to you. Now, I recognize there's a structure in most workplaces. Maybe it's based on, seniority, as in I'm in a certain position or I've been there a certain amount of time. Maybe it's because I have control over something that you need to be able to do your work. Lots of ways to have status. But no one wants to work when they feel like a cog in a wheel. No one wants to work with somebody that treats them as if they're less. So when you're approaching someone on something they're doing that's driving you nuts, you gotta treat them as an equal. It's just so easy, especially if you're in a position of authority, to say to them, well, I'm above you, so you need to do it this way because I said so. But most of us understand, just because you say so doesn't mean I'm going to. You can't make me. You can't make me believe that's the right way. I might do it because you told me to and because I know that you're the boss, but I might also slack off on it because you treated me like my opinion didn't matter. And again, goes to that other stuff we just talked about, the bids, the validation. If I say, do it this way, and someone wants to say, well, actually, the problem with that is, but I don't listen to that, I may be missing out on important information. And I may be telling that person, don't bother telling me things. I'm not going to listen. So really trying to have that equality, even when you have authority, and working together. When you play adversary roles, and this particularly happens in workplace environments where we're competing for resources or the boss's attention, we're competing to try to get things done, we want to win awards, whatever it might be. When we compete, sometimes we see each other as adversaries. You're not my teammate, you're my competition. But when you do that, it's a little harder to want to work with somebody. It's a little harder to fix a behavior that's driving you nuts. Why should I change that? You're my competition. I shouldn't make things easier for you. Managers always need to watch for those kind of dynamics in the workplace, and they can really be unhealthy for a good team. But as a teammate, as an employee, it's also important to look at, am I seeing people as adversaries, including, am I seeing my boss as an adversary? It can really make it hard to want to negotiate with them, to want to negotiate with you. I know some of these are basic things you guys know, but I think they're important to consider in this context. So like I said, we use Gottman a lot. So Gottman in couples counseling does a lot of work on how to help marriages last, how to recognize when a marriage is starting to not do so well, and how to fix it. Now, more recently, he's been doing some stuff on how to apply some of those concepts in the workplace. And that's what this is. So in a marriage, we talk about something called love maps, where you really need to know your partner and show interest in your partner and their personal interests, their professional interests, their family interests, all those things, for there to be a really solid relationship. But this is important at work too. If I see my colleague as just my colleague, we run the risk of not treating them as an equal and not seeing their value as a person. This is also, again, important for supervisors. Every person that comes to work is more than a worker. They might be a parent. They might be someone's kid. They might have amazing hobbies, goals, dreams. If we treat someone like they don't matter, they're not invested in working with us. And that can really damage a relationship and make that person feel like a difficult person for you to work with. I'm not saying you need to be best friends with everyone you work with, but see them as more than just your coworker. Get to know them at least a little bit. Provide positive feedback. This is not just for managers, this is for just your coworkers. When I compliment someone, they're more likely to see that I value them. They're more likely to be willing to talk with me when I say, hey, when you borrowed my office last week, you left a water bottle in it. Can you please make sure that we clear off the desk when you leave? It really helps me out so I don't have to clean it up. But if I'm not showing them that I care and value them as a person, Then it's just, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Positive feedback, genuine. If it's really hard for you to give genuine feedback to someone that drives you nuts, which happens, when someone starts driving you nuts, sometimes all you can see is the things they do that drive you bats. But if you can't find something of value in it, it's going to be hard for you to work forward with them. Because even if they quit the behavior, you're going to still be looking for things that drive you nuts. So it's about really building that admiration and respect for each other. We talked about bids a little earlier, turn towards instead of away. Really interacting with someone. When you ignore an email, when someone asks for your help and you just are dismissive, it makes someone not want to engage with you and see you as difficult. Now, can this go the other way where someone's maybe taking advantage of you? Sure. But then it still goes back to, how do we do this in a way that's respectful of each other? They might need to be respectful of you, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden if you're disrespectful, that's going to help you. Setting those boundaries. Answering an email, I acknowledge that you asked for my attention on this matter. Doesn't mean that maybe I'm going to respond to an email at 2 in the morning. That's a boundary. But don't expect someone to answer a bid if you're not answering bids. It goes both ways. Perception becomes reality. If I see someone as negative, if I always see, you know what, she's just doing it to drive me nuts because she's jealous of blah, 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 then everything they do is going to be colored with that view I have. It becomes a lens that I see it through. It's really easy to do that with a coworker that's driving you crazy. If you're not willing to see them in a positive light, you cannot fix the relationship. And it is a relationship. It can't just be one person trying to fix. Manage conflict, addressing both solvable and perpetual problems with colleagues in an open matter. A perpetual problem is a problem that's going to just keep coming up. So if I have maybe that type B colleague, that one that's always going to be a few minutes late maybe, or maybe there's someone that they're never late, but maybe they're not good filers. Maybe they're last minute people on getting stuff done. It might be a perpetual problem that I'm not that style and it drives me bats. It might just keep coming up, but it's worth addressing. Hey, I couldn't find the file last week. Could you be a little better about letting me know where I can find those? Can we work on a filing system? Can we organize it in some way? It's really about meeting in the middle and not avoiding discussing problems. Sometimes it's not as big a problem. We were just having a bad day. We're just frustrated with that person. It doesn't actually need to be solved. But when there is a real problem, just keeping it to yourself just builds it up for later. And again, when you finally blow up, it's brand new to them. They didn't realize that was driving you that nuts. But for you, it's been building for weeks, months. And the resentment has just grown and grown because they kept doing it and doing it. We also sometimes don't actually talk about the problem, but think that we've already shown there was. You wouldn't think it, but I've seen a lot of people in the workplace, they've done things like, well, they know I'm mad. Oh, did you talk to them about it? No, they should know. I stopped answering their emails. I stopped stopping by their desk. They should know I'm mad. Not necessarily. You didn't clearly say, I'm mad about this thing, or I'm frustrated, or I need this thing to change. They're going to have to guess. No one's really comfortable with guessing. It tends to go badly. Better to communicate about that problem and really work on how can we fix it. Guessing tends to just build resentment and confusion. So facilitate career advancement is not just a manager. It's also about supporting each other's professional goals. If you have a colleague that's maybe going to school, maybe it drives you nuts they're not at work as often. It's okay to communicate that that's a problem. But I've heard many times where someone said, well, you know, you really should be making your workplace a priority more than school. You're telling your colleague that their goals aren't as important as the workplace. That's not necessarily okay, and it's not going to facilitate conversation. But I've also heard people say it about people's goals with their children, with their spouses. You wouldn't think anyone would cross that line, but it actually happens quite a bit. But once you do that, you're telling them they're not valuable. Their stuff isn't valuable. It makes it hard to want to negotiate and work with you. Create a shared culture. So creating shared meaning. We have to have things at work that we share. It could be the goal of just making that paycheck, but bigger goals are better. Things like, we want to be the best at this. We want to provide good service. We want to get through this difficult time. When we're working together towards the same goal or even the same values, it's easier to want to work with somebody. Now, sometimes someone has different values or a culture style than you, and that can be a difficulty in a workplace. I did do a presentation on teamwork that I recommend for that, but it's something to consider as well with a difficult coworker. Commitment and trust. The last, most important part of the sound relationship. If I don't show that I'm committed to working with you, if I'm not trustworthy with you, it's hard for you to do the same for me. My coworker is not showing they trust me, it's hard for me to want to work with them. It goes both ways. So turn towards instead of away. Other thing with Gottman that we always talk about is something called the Four Horsemen. If you've ever done couples counseling, you probably have heard of it. So Four Horsemen are the things that Gottman talks about as being signals of a relationship starting to go poorly, maybe ending in divorce. But it's also an indication that maybe your relationship with an employee is going downhill. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These are the Four Horsemen. Now, we also talk about the opposites. How do we fix those? So with criticism, we talk about gentle startups. So instead of saying, you are so annoying when you do that, could you stop? Hey, remember how last week we talked about how when you tap your pen, it just drives me nuts? Could you lay off a little bit? Now, that's not a perfect one, but even that's a more gentle one. Contempt. It does build sometimes when someone's driving you bats, where you actually start to feel like they are there to drive you nuts and you do not like them, you do not want to work with them, you don't want to get along with them. But if you can't find some way to appreciate who they are and their place in the workplace, you are not going to move past that. Not saying there aren't sometimes genuine things that someone does that causes you a problem, but it is about, how do I keep this relationship up? That means two people need to have to appreciate each other. Defensiveness, so the opposite would be building a culture of responsibility. I take responsibility for my stuff, you take responsibility for your stuff. Now, some of that is a manager's role, but all of us can work better at taking responsibility for our parts and things. If I'm willing to take responsibility for mine, it's more likely that someone can take responsibility for theirs. Stonewalling, so avoiding people, ignoring people. Self-soothing is kind of the opposite for that. So really doing things to help yourself feel safe and that your boundaries are respected. If it's someone else, like helping them feel that their boundaries are respected, that they're safe. Most workplaces, it's not a risk of safety per se, but when my opinions aren't valued, when I don't feel like my work is valued, it's really hard to want to interact. So I might stonewall and avoid everybody. That's why that's like, physiological self-soothing is so important. Appreciation and investment, so emotional banks. I do talk again more about this in the teamwork webinar, but showing people that you care about them. We have banks with each other. And if I'm investing in your bank, you're likely to invest in mine. If you and I have a really good bank going where you feel appreciated by me, you're more likely to listen to me when I have to tell you something you don't want to hear. But if we don't have that, it's a little harder. Think of it kind of like when you have a new employee come in or join your team. You don't know them yet, they don't know you. So it's a little harder to say, trust them or put a lot of effort and work in because they're new. But over time, the more you guys get to know each other, work together, you're more likely to feel like, oh yeah, I can ask them for help. I can rely on them for this part of the job. That takes investment, that takes time and work. Gottman method and teams. So again, I talk about this more in the teamwork webinar. Gottman method is this idea about when we get into a conflict, when we hit that fight or flight point, you're not gonna get anywhere. So what we often try to do is we try to keep arguing until we figure something out. But what that tends to do is just lead to more resentment, more hurt. You're better off calling a timeout and walking away to physiologically self-soothe and feel better so you can approach it again later with yourself being in a spot where you can actually discuss it. Once you've hit that point where you feel like you have to make them hear you, I have to push you harder, I have to make you listen, you're at a point where you're not gonna get anywhere. You're not actually gonna be listening. So taking that break, if you can, and putting it off till later is really helpful. So some basics on communication: listen to understand versus listening to respond. If you're in fight or flight, you're just listening enough to decide what you're going to say next. Or if you're just not invested with that person, you might be doing that. But we should be truly trying to listen and understand where someone's coming from and what they're saying, rather than just focusing on our response. It's a better way to communicate and feel heard and appreciated. Direct and clear, checking for understanding. We're so good about just saying something and assuming that someone heard exactly what we meant. But taking just a couple seconds, couple minutes to say, hey, when you said you need that taken care of, did you mean today? Or did you just mean as soon as I finish this project or as soon as I'm available? It can cut out so much conflict and crap. Body language and tone. Because we're always so busy, sometimes we don't stop to actually make eye contact and hold still enough to show that we're fully paying attention when we give instructions or listen to instructions or directions or information. Taking that time. When counselors go to school, one of the things we learn is how to watch for that. So things like not putting a desk between us. It's one of the reasons counselors really struggle with adjusting to virtual at first, because we see that as something between us and the client. But things like how we look at you. In a group, we often have to make eye contact with everybody. We have to use a very level, direct tone, because doing something else might make someone not want to participate, not want to talk to us or trust us. Technology can be tricky. Zoom has problems. Any video service that you use might have glitches that makes it hard to talk. Sometimes when you text somebody, the context is completely missed. And sometimes an email doesn't communicate accurately what you're trying to say. Recognize what works best for the people you work with. It can only communicate so much. We just talked about appreciation and buy-in, showing that I appreciate you, and that I have buy-in and investment in you, so that you can feel the same way with me. Always avoiding tug of wars. If you're just going to battle with somebody, you're not going to get somewhere. Humor is a very useful tool. Always be careful. Just because something's very funny and appropriate to you does not necessarily mean that it's that way for someone else. So we talk about ants or distorted thinking sometimes in counseling. I think it's important with people that you might struggle with. Now, you guys can always watch this later if you want to read more in detail, but these are pretty basic. Black and white, catastrophizing, mind reading, personalizing. This is ways to kind of get really stuck on this idea that they're out there to cause you trouble. And it can really make it hard to fix a situation. They're not calling me back because they want me to fail at this thing. They're not calling me back because they're still mad about that thing last year. Personalizing. Well, we need to do it this way or this way. There's no other way to do it. It's not worth discussing. It has to be one or the other. All that is very distorted thinking, and it doesn't promote good discussions. Catastrophizing is making something out to be bigger than it is. Mind reading, assuming that what I'm thinking is what you're thinking. Jumping to conclusions, assuming without checking the evidence. We're going to talk a little bit about bias in this presentation, but basically assuming something without checking that it's fact. Oh, I must have double grabbed this. I apologize for that. So right into bias. Conscious bias is a belief that we're aware of and hold about a person, place, or thing that influence how we view that person, place, or thing. Unconscious bias is a belief we hold about a person, place, or thing that we're unaware of. There's a riddle that a lot of HRs use when they talk about bias. You guys might have heard it before. The riddle is a father and a son are in a serious car accident. When EMS arrive, the father has already passed away. When the son arrives at the hospital, the surgeon says that someone else will have to operate as this is their son. How is that possible? Now, the answer to the riddle is that the surgeon is the son's mother. But one of the reasons people struggle with this riddle is we automatically assume that the surgeon must be a male. So that must be who that is. It must be the father. How could it be a father if we don't consider the idea that it could be a female, or that that father might be married to a man, and that that man might be the other parent? This is that bias unconscious. We don't think about where that comes from, but it still might be something that we think or feel. And so it's something to watch for and something to kind of learn in ourselves. In counselors, we at school have to actually learn about our own biases. So these are some common ones. Some of these are more things that go to HR, but they can make things difficult to work with a coworker. So generation and age. We were just talking about rookies versus this person that's green and new. That could be someone versus someone that's been there maybe 20 years and is an old hat at this. But also someone that will say, I don't like working with millennials. They're so difficult. This generation is so focused on social media. But I could hear someone from that generation say, well, older people don't recognize how much they messed up the world, and they don't know how to use tech. Those are biases. Just because that applies to some people doesn't mean it applies to everybody. The bosses are always out to get you. They're always over here trying to make things difficult. Employees are always trying to make things hard. This department never listens. IT never helps. Ability. So that could not just be disabilities. It could be that someone struggles with something. Behavior. We've talked a lot about behavior already. Areas of struggle. So things they're maybe not good at. Affiliations with teams, hobbies, interests, political opinions, beliefs, gender. I mean, we're adults, but I've seen people actually fight with someone at work over sports teams, over political opinions. Now, when it gets into race, religion, sexuality, class, family, I put age there again, ability, medical, gender, those can end up being HR issues. Now, I can't advise you on what's always best without knowing the details of your situation. Sometimes it needs to go to HR. Some of these, though, we can fix ourselves and really look at what bias might be at play here. Now, most people tell me, well, I'm not biased. I'm not like that. But everyone has biases. It's just making an educated guess or an assumption based on what we think it might be. They're not always negative. It's really just we assume this, we haven't confirmed it. Everyone has them. Like I said, counselors in school, we have to study our biases. We have to identify which ones we have. We're supposed to have them. What I can't do is let a bias that I have maybe influence a decision I'm making, especially if it could cause harm. So it's about checking ourselves, really looking at, is this a bias that is going to cause harm? Why do I believe this? Is this fact in this case? But everyone has them. And it comes from experience. It comes from what society believes, media. It comes from our families, our traditions. It comes from bad experience, hurt feelings and self-doubt, or inaccurate or poorly done research. Sometimes it's just anxiety about something that's unfamiliar. Some of the ones that I hear a lot of aren't so much things like race or gender or even color of skin, but things like, well, I can't talk to them about that because, well, they're this. They're not going to understand. Political ones are one I hear a lot right now. Well, they're not going to understand that because of this. I have a lot of people that will assume something and think they're being helpful by assuming, well, because they're dealing with this, because they're female, because they're of this color, this religion, because they're this age group, they'll like this. I'm being helpful. But if you don't check, you don't know. I've also had people say, well, I know people that are like that. So I apply what I know from them to someone else. Again, it's a bias. You think and you might be right, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Until it's confirmed, it's not fact. It can lead to discriminatory behavior and prejudice, which can cause harm, and it can lead to legal or ethical consequences. One of the things that will sometimes happen when I'm working with someone with a difficult coworker is it turns out that it is a bias, that it is something that we believe that we don't know, but we believe about that person based on a trait or behavior that they have. Now, I know there's plenty of situations where that's just not the case, but it's always worth bringing up, and that's why it's in this presentation. Is there such a thing as positive bias? Absolutely. I can decide, well, because you are from this nationality, I bet you're really good at this. Because you come from a wealthy family, I bet you're really good with finances. But that can cause harm too. It can lead to unrealistic expectations. It can make someone not trust you. It can cause harm. Can bias be used for good? It can. It can sometimes help you make an educated guess, but it can sometimes really be wrong. It can sometimes help you make a decision that you have to make right then. But you got to check it. Otherwise, you're trying to rely on something that isn't proven. And some people say, well, I have good judgment. Okay, well, you talk to them, what do you know? And they'll tell me something, I'll go, well, how do you know that? Well, I know that because they were wearing this. I know that because they're of this age group. That's a bias. That's a guess. Maybe an educated guess. But until you've confirmed that information, you don't know. And it can be really problematic. So really checking yourself. With bias, with annoying coworkers or coworkers that are difficult, sometimes they're dealing with something you have no knowledge of, or they assume something about you, or you assume something about them. It's always worth checking yourself if that's the case. So this is just a quick little thing on how to move from fear to logic. With biases, sometimes it's based on fear. It's based on, I'm not comfortable in the situation, I don't know how to respond, or I feel like you're going to be this way based on this experience I've had. I've also seen this a lot with people that have been in a really bad job, maybe one where a boss treated them horribly, coworkers mistreated them, and then they come to this new job and they're now afraid. They're afraid that this is going to happen again. And so they get on the defense. And so someone acting a way that reminds them of that old job might make them disengage from their coworkers, might make them stonewall, might make them more likely to complain. It's always good to check for those things. You never know why someone does a behavior. Most behavior has a purpose, but be aware of how you feel. Again, having a bias itself is not a bad thing. It's okay to feel that way. Validate it. It's okay to have that feeling. But take a minute to really make sure that you're not letting that overwhelm what you should be doing. Now, taking 5 deep breaths or thinking of 3 things that you're grateful for, those are just mindfulness things. And we have so many webinars on those, so I won't go into it. But taking that moment to check yourself, to help your body feel safe, so that you can check, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I reacting this way because I assume something about you, or because I know something about you? If it is triggered by a specific issue, what can you do right now to deal with that issue? And sometimes it is calling a timeout. Sometimes it's taking a break. Sometimes it's talking to a counselor. That's one of the reasons we're here, is to help you guys with that. Sometimes it's about, I don't know what the answer is, and I need to talk to someone at work to help me with. That might be HR, that might be your boss, it might be a coworker. These are just some of the resources that I pulled this information from. These are all things I do recommend. There's the Gottman stuff on how to negotiate and find common ground. Relationship Cure by John Gottman. Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman. 5 Languages of Appreciation. So 5 love languages is well known. This is one specifically for the workplace. Ask a Manager by Allison Green. It's a book. It's also a blog. It's one I like to follow. It's mostly people kind of writing Dear Abby style to Allison and asking for advice in situations and people providing feedback. Some of the situations that come across those letters are ones I never hope to see in a workplace. Crucial Confrontations is a really good one. Surrounded by Idiots is a kind of recent one that's really interesting about how to communicate with each other in business when someone's difficult. And How to Work with and Lead People Not Like You is a really interesting one that came out recently by Kelly McDonald.